Good evening. It's Tuesday, the 21st of April. I'm Aharon Viner, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Just under 90 minutes from now, commemoration of the Memorial Day for fallen soldiers will begin with the sounding of a 1-minute siren throughout the country. At 8 o'clock this evening, the nation's citizens will collectively bow their heads in tribute to the 23,320 troops and other security personnel who gave their lives in defense of the state, as well as to the civilian victims of war and terrorism. The siren will be immediately followed with an official ceremony at the Western Wall in Jerusalem, in addition to countless other memorial services at communities nationwide. A short time ago, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu mourned the loss of fallen soldiers at the Yad Lebanim Memorial here in Jerusalem. He spoke about his personal grief for his brother Yonatan Netanyahu, who was killed while commanding the 1976 Entebbe hostage rescue mission. The Prime Minister said that bereaved families can take some solace knowing that their sons and daughters died while ensuring the future of the Jewish people. Tomorrow, another siren will ring out for 2 minutes at 11 o'clock in the morning, after which a state memorial will begin at the Mount Herzl National Cemetery in the capital. Other solemn ceremonies will be held at schools, institutions, and military cemeteries throughout Israel. Another ceremony at Mount Herzl will take place at 1 o'clock in the afternoon for the victims of terrorism. Remembrance Day will conclude at 8 p.m. tomorrow night with a changeover ceremony at Mount Herzl and the lighting of torches to mark the beginning of Independence Day. 116 names were added to this year's Remembrance Day list, including those of 67 soldiers killed during Operation Protective Edge last summer. Due to the screening of the names of each of the fallen on this channel throughout Remembrance Day, IBA News will not be broadcast tomorrow, but we will be back at 4 p.m. on Thursday. One of the names added to this year's database of terror victims is that of Mohammed Abu Khader, the 16-year-old resident of Beit Hanina, who was murdered in July of last year. 3 Jewish men allegedly abducted, beat, and burned Abu Khader to death in an apparent revenge attack for the June killings of 3 Israeli teenagers. The director of Mount Herzl, Chagai Admon, told the Times of Israel that, to the best of his knowledge, Abu Khader is the first Arab killed by Jews to be added to the Victims of Acts of Terror Memorial. 29-year-old Yosef Chaim Ben David is the chief suspect arrested on charges of carrying out the murder and claims that he is mentally unfit to stand trial. The 2 other suspects are denying responsibility. A joint Palestinian-Israeli memorial ceremony is also set to be held in Tel Aviv tomorrow evening. In other news, the East Jerusalem resident who fatally ran his car into 2 people on the eve of Holocaust Memorial Day has confessed to having acted deliberately. Khalid Kutena told authorities that he purposely rammed his car into 25-year-old Shalom Yochai Shirki and his girlfriend, Shira Klein, as the couple waited at a French Hill bus stop in the capital. Shirki was pronounced dead at the scene, and Klein remains hospitalized for critical injuries that she sustained in what has now been deemed a terror attack. According to the details released by the Shin Bet Security Service today, the East Jerusalem resident admitted that he meticulously planned the vehicular attack, including the selection of Jewish victims. He also claimed that because he suffered from mental anguish in the past, he was sure that he would be able to evade responsibility for his actions by pleading insanity. It appears that the Haifa Bay air pollution controversy may have been caused by misinformation. A statement issued by the Ministry of Health today disputed the claim that it made a week ago that the cancer rate among children in the city was disproportionately high compared with the national average. Ministry officials offered no explanation for the reversal. It was released following harsh criticism from Haifa Mayor Yonah Yahav, who had accused the Health Ministry of inaction over the alleged rise of contamination levels in the coastal city. Over the past 2 days, the mayor ordered the closure of factories believed to be responsible for generating the pollution, and he even dispatched municipal trucks to block the entrances of the plants. City Hall has decided to put the situation on hold until after Independence Day, as all options as how to proceed are under consideration. Turning now to coalition-building efforts and the negotiating teams for Prime Minister Netanyahu and Moshe Kahlon's Kulanu party appear to be close to striking a deal. The 2 party leaders issued a joint statement after meeting last night, saying that they achieved some progress and have scheduled a follow-up meeting. According to reports, Kulanu is set to receive the Finance, Environmental Protection, Construction, and Housing ministries. And in other developments, a Likud source says that the talks with United Torah Judaism have reached a very advanced stage, with second drafts of an accord being drawn up and exchanged. The official said that the universal conscription law has been a critical issue, with UTJ representatives demanding changes to several sections, including possible criminal sanctions for refusing to report to duty. IBA's Eli Wogelinter asked the Times of Israel editor David Horovitz whether the electorate will accept the rolling back of the Compulsory Service Law, which was a central piece of legislation during the last Knesset.
If there's a drastic change on the Haredi, the ultra-Orthodox draft, for example, I think many Israelis would be very upset.
But they talk about that specifically.
Right. If what ultimately everything comes down to is the abolition, for example, of criminal charges for people who are evading the draft, which is something that Netanyahu never supported anyway.
But it was done because of the only way it was going to pass in the Supreme Court Bagatz.
So, I think most people want to see a fairer sharing of the burden. I don't think people want to see people prosecuted and jailed and so on. They want to see a fairer sharing of the burden. So I don't know. It's silly to say, well, that's going to be terrible when you're hearing unconfirmed reports about the negotiations and what might play out. If at the end of it the Knesset rolls back what I think was a good faith effort to try and increase the proportion of young ultra-Orthodox men who are going into the army, which was and entering the workforce, which was a recognition of imperatives for that community as well as for the rest of Israel. I think that would be pretty unfortunate. I think most Israelis would be pretty unhappy. If there's a minor shift whereby an element that may not be crucial to that agreement is rolled back, that would be something else, and therefore I think it's worth waiting to see. And that, I think that relates to all of this negotiation. I mean, if you take the reports at face value, there's chaos there, Bennett's not going to join the government, maybe the Zionist Union is going to come in. I think a lot of this stuff can be taken with a pinch of salt. I think it's spectacularly unlikely that there won't be a coalition. I think it's very unlikely that it won't be the coalition we thought it would be from the day after the elections. The 67 seats of the Netanyahu and more naturally allied parties and so on, and I think there's a great deal of hot air and posturing, which by the way is unfortunate. Why should it take, was it 42 days or something, and Israel doesn't have the government 42, well, who's the finance minister? Oh, that's Netanyahu as well, and who's the education minister? Well, that we know at the moment. I mean, that's not terribly healthy, but that's the reality of our system. I wouldn't get too hung up on the unconfirmed stuff. When we start to see things changing, then we'll know how we should feel about it.
2 people were arrested today in connection to the migrant shipwreck off the coast of Libya earlier this week, in which it is now believed that up to 900 people were killed. The latest developments come as the European Union held discussions to address the wave of illegal migration, as we hear from IBA reporter Alexandra Jen.
The EU has issued a 10-point plan following worldwide concern over the increasing number of migrant deaths at sea. European Union ministers met in Luxembourg yesterday to determine the best approach to the continued smuggling controversy that has led to more than 1,500 deaths already this year. The 10-point plan emphasizes a united fight against human traffickers and smugglers, the strengthening of efforts to save lives at sea, and a shared responsibility within the EU to relocate refugees.
If we do not act now, the crisis will take dangerous proportions in the months to come. Europe needs to respond united to this challenge that is related to the core values of the Union.
Today, the Tunisian captain of the capsized migrant smuggling ship, 27-year-old Ali Malik, and Syrian crew member, 25-year-old Mahmoud Bikit, were arrested for the disaster at sea. They are both being held for aiding illegal immigration, and Malik is additionally facing charges for reckless multiple homicide for the deaths of at least 700 people, though it could be as many as 950. It may never be known exactly how many people died in the shipwreck. The 27 survivors, including the captain and the crew member, arrived in Sicily's Catania overnight. The 24 dead bodies that were recovered were also brought ashore. Though search and rescue teams are still attempting to find more people, they lack confidence due to the 3-mile deep seas of the Mediterranean, making it almost impossible to retrieve any remaining bodies. It is reported that the ship capsized because a Portuguese container ship approached the migrant boat, causing the poorly made vessel to rock. The boat then tipped over and ultimately sank as panicked migrants tried to escape. Hundreds of the migrants were locked in the basement of the ship, and hundreds more were on the deck when it began to overturn. The Portuguese container ship's crew immediately deployed rescue boats, nets, and life rafts, but for most of the passengers, it was too late. As the conflict and political upheaval worsens in Libya, their people are desperate to flee the country. Smugglers and traffickers are taking full advantage of the situation and charge as much as $8,000 to transport migrants illegally. The EU's initiatives may be the only saving grace for these desperate people looking for a better life. Alexandra Jen for IBA News.
3 Ethiopian asylum seekers who left Israel last summer are believed to be among those who were recently killed by the Islamic State in Libya. This according to the Israeli NGO Hotline for Refugees and Migrants. An ISIS video released on Sunday showed its fighters shooting and beheading captives they called crusaders and identified as Ethiopian Christians. As incentive to leave, Israel offers illegal migrants the option of traveling to countries other than their homelands that have not yet been announced. Earlier this year, Interior Minister Gilad Erdan offered assurances that refugees who agreed to go to third countries would be safe and receive fair treatment. The 3 ISIS victims were reportedly unable to attain legal status in the other countries for unknown reasons and are believed that they then entered Libya, where they were among the other foreign workers who were abducted and brutally murdered by the Islamic State. A criminal court in Cairo today sentenced ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi to 20 years in prison for inciting the killing of protesters outside the presidential palace December 2012. Judge Ahmed Youssef dropped charges of murder related to the deaths of at least 10 opposition demonstrators by supporters of the former leader. During the hearing at the National Police Academy, Morsi stood in a soundproof glass cage alongside 12 leaders of his Muslim Brotherhood Party and Islamist supporters, who included Mohammed El Beltaghi and Essam El Arian, who also each received 20 years behind bars. The co-defendants raised the four-finger sign symbolizing the deaths of hundreds of pro-Morsi activists at the Rabbi al-Adawiya Mosque when security forces violently dispersed a massive August 2013 sit-in demonstration. The country's first freely elected leader was overthrown by the military that same year, following demonstrations by millions of Egyptians demanding that he step down. Morsi is now being held at a high-security prison near Alexandria, and he still faces several other trials, along with thousands of other members of the Muslim Brotherhood. In other news, a 93-year-old former guard at the Auschwitz death camp today begged forgiveness as he took the stand on the opening day of his trial in Germany. Oskar Groening is charged with being an accessory to the murders of 300,000 people, for which he could be sentenced to life in prison. During his hour-long statement, the ethnic German bookkeeper said that there is no question that he shares moral guilt, but that the judges panel would have to determine whether or not he bears guilt under criminal law. He went on to say that he joined the SS in 1940 and was stationed at Auschwitz between May and June of 1944, where he counted and sorted money stolen from the exterminated prisoners, causing him to become known as the Accountant of Auschwitz. Prosecutors say that the defendant witnessed the entire killing process of 300,000 Jews who were almost immediately gassed to death as they and 125,000 others were brought in from Hungary. The trial is the first that's going to test a new track of German legal reasoning that has unleashed an 11th-hour wave of new investigations into those suspected of Nazi war crimes. Prosecutors argue that guards are liable for the murders at concentration camps, even without evidence of direct involvement in specific deaths. There are currently 11 open investigations against former Auschwitz guards, with charges already filed in 3 of those cases, including Groening's. A further 8 former Majdanek guards are also under investigation. About 60 Holocaust survivors or their relatives from the U.S., Canada, Israel, and elsewhere have joined the prosecution as co-plaintiffs, as is allowed under German law.
Basically, I'm just hoping that the trial will come to the judgment that he was guilty and establish the new rules for the future, for your generation, where these things cannot be done irresponsibly. They have to know that justice is there and it's going to be served, and those who commit crimes today must know they will be held responsible in the future, and never again will they be able to just plead, I'm a cog in the machinery, I didn't kill.
An Argentine prosecutor has dropped the case against President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who faced charges of helping to shield Iranian officials allegedly behind the 1994 bombing of the Jewish Community Center. The latest decision effectively ends the judicial process against Kirchner that exposed deep divisions in the South American nation. Javier de Luca told the Court of Appeals that there is insufficient evidence in the investigation conducted by late state prosecutor Alberto Nisman to warrant a probe, upholding the previous findings of a federal judge and the Federal Appeals Court. The president has strongly denied accusations that she and other top members of her administration covered up involvement in the bombing by several Iranian officials, made by Nisman just days before he was found dead on January 18th. 85 people were killed in the Buenos Aires attack, which was the country's worst act of terrorism. Questions over Nisman's death persist as investigators seek to establish whether he committed suicide or was the victim of homicide. Friends and family of Nisman are adamant that the 51-year-old attorney would not take his own life. Even though Kirchner has been vindicated in court, her administration continues to confront fallout over Nisman's death, and several national polls reveal that her popularity levels have severely eroded. Palestinian Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah is in Indonesia, where he called on leaders from Asian and African nations to help in the campaign for international recognition of a Palestinian state. Hamdallah said that he plans to meet with many of the delegations from the 34 countries attending the Asian African Conference in Jakarta to also lobby for increased support for the reconstruction of Gaza. He accused Israel of carrying out atrocities and aggression and insisted that the Palestinian people remain committed to peace and nonviolence. During the two-day conference in the world's largest Muslim country, the heads of state are expected to approve a Declaration of Palestine.
The Declaration on Palestine will highlight the commitments of the Asian and African nations to create an independent state of Palestine on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital, while condemning the Israeli atrocities against our people, land and resources.
There was drama at Ben Gurion International Airport today when a Boeing 737 passenger jet that had just taken off for Prague executed an airborne U-turn and safely returned to the tarmac. A state of emergency was declared after 26 rubber parts from the plane's right wheel were found on the runway, forcing the pilot to return so the aircraft could be repaired. Paramedics and Homefront command units deployed to the area as the jet made several overhead passes to permit examination from the ground to assess the level of damage before successfully landing. All 181 passengers and crew aboard the aircraft disembarked without injury. Thousands of mourners gathered at the Gush Etzion settlement of Alon Shavut this morning to pay their final respects to Rabbi Aharon Lichtenstein, who passed away yesterday at the age of 81 following a lengthy illness. The funeral procession then traveled to the Har HaMenuchot cemetery in Jerusalem, where the leader of the religious Zionist and modern Orthodox world was laid to rest. Several eulogies were delivered during the service at the rabbi's community, where he headed the Har Etzion Yeshiva for nearly half a century since immigrating from the United States in 1971. The Central Bureau of Statistics has released the latest population figures, as it does every year ahead of independence celebrations. 8.345 million people live in the country, compared with just 806,000 back when the modern state of Israel was founded in 1948. 74.9% of the population is Jewish, meaning 6.251 million. 20.7%, or 1.73 million, are Arab, while 4.4%, or about 364 million residents, are defined as belonging to other sectors, such as non-Arab Christians or those belonging to small religious sects. According to the registry, the national population rose by 2% last year, with 162,000 new Israelis, 176,000 of whom were babies, while another 32,000 immigrated to the country. 44,000 citizens passed away. And while just 35% of Israelis were native-born back in 1948, now 3/4 of all Jewish residents were born in Israel. Taking a look at local finance, and the shekel today put in another mixed performance, while share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were up across the board. Here's a look at the final numbers. The IBA weather team tells us to expect isolated light rain showers in the north tonight as well as tomorrow morning, when we're likely to see an additional drop in temperatures to levels lower than normal for this time of year. Here's the forecast at home and abroad over the next 24 hours. Thank you for being with us this evening. And just to remind you, we will not be broadcasting tomorrow due to observance of Remembrance Day, but we will be back at our regular time on Thursday. I'm Aharon Viner, wishing you a meaningful Memorial Eve. Shalom from Jerusalem, and see you on Israel's 67th anniversary of independence.